Hello, welcome back to my channel, Nissan Magar. I realized that I didn't mention that I'm doing this 3 years challenge that I'm gonna be reading every single day for the next 3 years. I didn't mention as I think I should have mentioned in the first video. Better late than never. Okay, let's jump into our reading. The seductive process. Most of us understand that certain actions on our part will have a pleasing and seductive effect on the person we would like to seduce. The problem is that we are generally too self absorbed. We think more about what we want from others than what they could want from us. We may occasionally do something that is seductive, but often we follow this up with a selfish or aggressive action. We are in a hurry to get what we want, to or unaware of what we are doing. We show a side of ourselves that is petty and banal, deflecting any illusions or fantasies a person might have about us. Our attempts at seduction usually do not last long enough to create much of an effect. You will not seduce anyone by simply depending on your engaging personality or by occasionally doing something novel or alluring. Seduction is a process that occurs over time. The longer you take and the slower you go, the deeper you will penetrate into the mind of your victim. It is an art that requires patience, focus, and strategic thinking. You need to always be on one step ahead of your victim, throwing dust in their eyes, creating a spell, keeping them off balance. The 24th chapter in this section will argue with a series of texts that will help you get out of yourself and into the mind of your victim so that you can play it like an instrument. The chapters are placed in a loose order, going from the initial contact with the victim to the successful conclusion. This order is based on certain timeless laws of human psychology because people's thoughts tend to revolve around their daily concerns and insecurities. You cannot proceed with a seduction until you slowly put their anxieties to sleep and fill their distracted minds with thoughts of you. The opening chapters will help you accomplish this. There is a natural tendency in relationship for people to become so familiar with one another that boredom and stagnation set in. Mystery is the lifeblood of seduction, and to maintain it, you have to constantly surprise your victims, stir things up, even shock them. A seduction should never settle into a comfortable routine. The middle and later chapters will instruct you in the art of alternating hope and despair, pleasure and pain until your victims weaken and succumb. In each instance, one tactic is setting up the next one. Allowing you to push it further with something bolder and more violent. A seducer cannot be timid or merciful. To help you move the seduction along, the chapters are arranged in 4 phases, each phase with a particular goal to aim for: getting the victim to think of you, gaining access to their emotions by creating moments of pleasure and confusion, going deeper by working on their unconscious storing of repressed desires, and finally inducing physical surrender. The phases are clearly marked and explained with a short introduction. By following these phases, you will work more effectively on your victim's mind and create the slow and hypnotic pace of a ritual. In fact, the seductive process may be thought of as a kind of irrational ritual in which you are uprooting people from their habits, giving them novel experiences, putting them through tests before initiating them into a new life. It is best to read all of the chapters and gain as much knowledge as possible. When it comes times to apply these tactics, you will want to pick and choose which one are appropriate for a particular victim. Sometimes only a few are sufficient depending on the level of resistance you meet and the complexity of your victim's problems. These tactics are equally applicable to social and political seductions, minus the sexual component in phase 4. At all costs, resist the temptation to hurry to the climax of your seduction or to improvise. You are not being seductive but selfish. Everything in daily life is hurried and improvised. And you need to offer something different by taking your time and respecting the seductive process. You will not only break down your victim's resistance, you will make them fall in love. Okay. Part 1. Separation. Storing interest and desire. Your victims live in their own worlds, their minds occupied with anxieties and daily concerns. Your goal in this initial phase is to slowly separate them from the closed world and fill their minds with thoughts of you. Once you have decided whom to seduce, 1. Choose the right victim. Your first task is to get your victim's attention to stir interest in you. For those who might be more resistant or difficult, you should try a slower and more insidious approach, first winning their friendship to create a false sense of security. Approach indirectly. For those who are bored and less difficult to reach, a more dramatic approach will work, either fascinating them with a mysterious presence. Third, send mixed signals, or seeming to be someone who is coveted and fought over by others, for appear to be an object of desire. Once the victim is properly intrigued, you need to transform their interest into something stronger, desire. Desire is generally preceded by feelings of emptiness, of something missing inside that needs fulfillment. You must deliberately instill such feelings, make your victims aware of the adventure and romance that are lacking in their lives. 5. Create a need. Store anxiety and discontent. If they see you as the one to fill their emptiness, interest will blossom into desire. The desire should be stoked by subtly planting ideas in their minds, hints of the seductive pleasures that await them. 6. Master the art of insinuation. Mirroring your victims' values, indulging them in their wants and moods will charm and delight them. 7. Enter the spirit. Without realizing how it has happened, more and more of their thoughts now revolve around you. The time has come for something stronger. Lure them with an irresistible pleasure or adventure. 8. Create temptation and they will follow your lead. Okay, 1. Choose the right victim. Everything depends on the target of your seduction. Study your prey thoroughly and choose only those who will prove susceptible to your charms. The right victims are those for the the right victims are those for whom you can feel a void, who see in you something exotic. They are often isolated or at least somewhat unhappy, perhaps because of recent adverse circumstances, or can easily be made so. For the completely contented person, is almost impossible to seduce. The perfect victim has some natural qualities that attracts him. The strong emotion this quality inspires will help make your seductive maneuvers seem more natural and dynamic. The perfect victim allows for the perfect chase. Preparing for the hunt. The young Vicomte de Valmont was a notorious libertine in the Paris of the 1770s, the reign of many a young girl, and the ingenious seducer of the wives of illustrious aristocrats. But after a while, the repetitiveness of it all began to bore him. His successes came too easily. Soon one year, during the sweltering, slow month of August, he had decided to take a break from Paris and visit his aunt at her chateau in the provinces. Life there was not what he was used to. There were country walks, chats with the local vicar, card games. His city friends, particularly his fellow libertine and confident in the Marquis de Mertelli, expected him to hurry back. There were other guests at the chateau, however, including the President in the Tourvel, a 20-year-old woman whose husband was temporarily absent, having work to do elsewhere. The Presidente had been languishing at the chateau, waiting for him to join her. Valmont had met her before. She was certainly beautiful, but had a reputation as a prude who was extremely devoted to her husband. She was not a court lady. Her taste in clothing was atrocious. She always covered her neck with ghastly frills, and her conversation lacked wit. For some reason, however, far from Paris, Valmont began to see distress in a new light. He followed her to the chapel where she went every morning to pray. He caught glimpses of her at dinner or playing cards. Unlike the ladies of Paris, she seemed unaware of her charms. This excited him. Because of the heat, she wore a simple linen dress which revealed her figure. A piece of muslin covered her breast, letting him more than imagine them. Her hair, unfashionable in its slightest disorder, conjured the boredom, and her face, he had never noticed how expressive it was. Her features lit up when she gave alms to a beggar. She blushed at the slightest praise. She was so natural and unself-conscious, and when she talked of her husband or religious matters, he could sense the depth of her feelings, if such a passionate nature were ever detoured into a love affair. Valmont extended his stay at the chateau, much to the delight of his aunt, who could not have guessed at the reason, and he wrote to the Marisque de Martillo, explaining his new ambition to seduce Madame de Troyes. The Marquis was incredulous. He wanted to seduce this brute. If he succeeded, how little pleasure she would give him, and if he failed, what a disgrace. The great libertine, unable to seduce a wife whose husband was far away, she wrote a sarcastic letter which only inflamed Valmont. Valmont further. The conquest of this notorious virtuous woman would prove his greatest seduction. His reputation would only be enhanced. There was an obstacle. There was an obstacle, though, that seemed to make success almost impossible. Everyone knew Valmont's reputation, including the Presidente. She knew how dangerous it was to ever be alone with him, how people would talk about the least association with him. Valmont did everything to belie his reputation, even going so far as to attend church services and seem dependent of his ways. The president did notice, but still kept her distance. The challenge she presented to Valmont was irresistible, but could he meet it? Valmont decided to test the waters. One day he arranged a little walk with the president in his arm. He chose a delightful path that they had never taken before, but at a certain point they reached a little ditch, unsuitable for a lady to cross on her own, and yet Valmont said the rest of the walk was too nice for them to turn back, and he gallantly picked up his aunt in his arms and carried her across the ditch, making her president laugh precariously, but then it was her turn, and Valmont purposely picked her up a little awkwardly so that she caught at his arms, and while he was holding her against him, he could feel her heart beating faster and saw her blush. His aunt saw this too and cried out, "The child is afraid," but Valmont sensed otherwise. Now he knew that the challenge could be met, that the Presidente could be won, the seduction could proceed. Interpretation. Valmont, the Presidente de Tourelle, and the Marquis de Mathilde are all characters in the 18th century French novel Dangerous Liaisons by Charles de Laclos. The character of the Valmont was inspired by several real-life libertines of the time, most prominent of all the Duc de Richelieu. In the story, Valmont worries that his seductions have become mechanical. He makes a move and the woman almost always responds the same way. But no two seductions should be the same. A different target should change the whole dynamic. Valmont's problem is that he is always seducing the wrong time. He realizes this is when he meets Madame de Tourelle. It is not because her husband is a count that he decides to seduce her, or because she is stylishly dressed or in desired by other men. The usual reason he chooses her because in her unconscious ways she has already seduced him. A bare arm, an unrehearsed laugh, a playful manner, all these have captured his attention because none of them is contrived. Once he falls under her spell, the strength of his desire will make him subsequent maneuvers seem less calculated. He is apparently unable to help himself, and his strong emotions will slow him factor. Beyond the effect the president has on Valmont, she has other traits that make her the perfect victim. She is bored, which draws her towards adventure. She is naive and unable to see through his tricks. Finally, the Achilles heels. She believes herself immune to seduction. Almost all of us are vulnerable to the attraction of other people, and we take precautions against unwanted lapses. Madame de Tourelle takes none. Once Valmont has tested her at the ditch and has seen she is physically vulnerable, he knows that eventually she will fall. Life is short and should not be wasted pursuing and seducing the wrong people. The choice of target is critical. It is the setup of the seduction, and it will determine everything else that follows. The perfect victim does not have certain facial features, or the same taste in music, or similar goals in life. That is how a banal seducer chooses his or her targets. The perfect victim is the person who stirs you in a way that cannot be explained in words, whose effect on you has nothing to do with superficialities. He or she often has a quality that you yourself lack and may even secretly envy. The Presidente, for example, has an innocence that Valmont long ago lost or never had. There should be a little bit of tension. The victim may fear you a little, even slightly dislike you. Such tension is full of erotic potential and will make the seduction much livelier. Be more creative in choosing your prey, and you will be rewarded with a more exciting seduction. Of course, it means nothing if the Potential victim is not open to your influence. Test the person first. Once you feel that he or she is also vulnerable to you, then the hunting can begin. It is a stroke of good fortune to find one who is worth seducing. Most people rush ahead, become engaged, or do other stupid things, and in a turn of the hand, everything is over, and they know neither what they have won nor what they have lost. Soren Kierkegaard. Keys to seduction. Throughout life, we find ourselves having to persuade people, to seduce them. Some will relatively open to our influence, if only in subtle ways, while others seem impervious to our charms. Perhaps we find this a mystery beyond our control, but this is an ineffective way of dealing with life. Seducers, whether sexual or social, prefer to pick the odds. As often as possible, they go towards people who betray some vulnerability to them and avoid the ones who cannot be moved. To leave people who are inaccessible to you alone is a wise path. You cannot seduce everyone. On the other hand, you must actively hunt out the prey that responds the right way. This will make your seductions that much more pleasurable and satisfying. How do you recognize your victims? By the way they respond to you. You should not pay so much attention to their conscious responses. As a person who is obviously trying to please or charm you is probably playing to your vanity and wants something from you. Instead, pay greater attention to those responses outside conscious control. A blush, an involuntary uh, mirroring of some gesture of yours, an unusual shyness, even perhaps a flash of anger or resentment. All of these show that you are having an effect on a person who is open to your influence. Like Velma, you can also recognize the right targets by the effect they are having on you. Perhaps they make you uneasy, perhaps they correspond to a deep-rooted childhood idea, or represent some kind of personal taboo that excites you, or suggest the person you imagine you would be if you were the opposite sex. When a person has such a deep effect on you, it transfers all of your social maneuvers. Your face and gestures become more animated. You have more energy. When victims resist you, as a good victim should, you in turn will be more creative, more motivated, overcome their resistance. The seduction will move forward like a good play. Your strong desire will infect the target and give them the dangerous sensation that they have a power over you. Of course, you are the one ultimately in control, since you are making your victims emotional at the right moments, leading them back and forth. Good seducers choose targets that inspire them, but they know how and when to restrain themselves. Never rush into the waiting arms of the person who seems to like you. That is not seduction, but insecurity. The need that grows you will make for a low level attachment, and interest on both sides will sag. Look at the types you have not considered before. That is where you will find challenge and adventure. Experienced hunters do not choose their prey by how easily it is caught. They want the thrill of the chase, a life, and the struggle. The fiercer, the better. Although the victim who is perfect for you depends on you, certain types lend themselves to a more satisfying seduction. Casanova liked young women who were unhappy or had suffered a serious misfortune. Such women appeal to his desire to play the savior, but is also a response to necessity. Happy people are much harder to seduce. Their contentment makes them inaccessible. It is always easier to fish in troubled waters. Also, an air of sadness is itself quite seductive. Genji, the hero of the Japanese novel The Tale of Genji, could not resist a woman with a melancholic air. In Kierkegaard's book The Seducer's Diary, the narrator Johannes has one main requirement in his victim: she must have imagination. That is why he chooses a woman who lives in a fantasy world, a woman who will envelop his every gesture in poetry, imagining far more than is there. Just as it is hard to seduce a person who is happy, it is hard to seduce a person who has no imagination. For women, the mainly man is often the perfect victim. Mark Antony was of this type. He loved pleasure, was quite emotional, and when it came to women, found it hard to think straight. He was easy for Cleopatra to manipulate. Once she gained a hold on his emotions, she kept him permanently on a string. A woman should never be put off by a man who seems overly aggressive. He is often the perfect victim. It is easy with a few coquettish tricks to turn that aggression around and make him your slave. Such men actually enjoy being made to chase after a woman. Be careful with appearances. The person who seems volcanically passionate is often hiding insecurity and self-involvement. This was what most men failed to perceive in the 19th century. Courtesan Lola Montez, she seemed to she seemed so dramatic, so exciting. In fact, she was a troubled, self-obsessed woman, but by the time men discovered that it was too late, they had become involved with her and could not extricate themselves without months of drama and torture. People who are outwardly distant or shy are often better targets than extroverts. They are dying to be drawn out, and still waters run deep. People with a lot of time on their hands are extremely susceptible to seduction. They have mental space for you to feel to that the Argonauts, the infamous 16th century Italian courtesan, preferred young men as her victims. Beside the physical reason for such a preference, they were more ideal than working men with careers and therefore more defenseless against an ingenious seductress. On the other hand, you should generally avoid people who are preoccupied with business or work. Seduction demands attention, and busy people have too little space in their minds for you to occupy. According to Freud, seduction begins early in life. In our relationship with our parents, they seduce us physically, both with bodily contact and by satisfying desires such as hunger, and we in turn try to seduce them into paying us attention. We are creatures by nature vulnerable to seduction throughout our lives. We all want to be seduced. We yearn to be drawn out of ourselves, out of our routines, and into the drama of eros. And what draws us more than anything is the feeling that someone has something we don't, a quality we desire. Your perfect victims are often people who think you have nothing. You have something they don't, and who will be enchanted to have it provided for them. Such victims may have a temperament quite the opposite of yours, and this difference will create an exciting tension. When Jian Qing, later known as Madame Mao, first met Mao Zedong in 1937 in his mountain retreat in western China, she could sense how desperate he was for a bit of color and spice in his life. All the camp's women dressed like the men, and abjured any feminine finery. Jiang had been an actress in Shanghai and was anything but austere. She supplied what he lacked, and she also gave him the added thrill of being able to educate her in communism, appealing to his Pygmalion complex, the desire to dominate, control, and remake a person. In fact, it was Jiang King who controlled her fortune husband, our future control her future husband. The greatest lack of all is excitement and adventure, which is precisely what seduction offers. In 1964, the Chinese actor C.P.A. Pu, a man who has gained fame as a female impersonator, met Bernard Briscoe, a young diplomat assigned to the French embassy in China. Briscoe had come to China looking for adventure and was disappointed to have little contact with Chinese people, pretending to be a woman who, when still a child, had been forced to live as a boy. Supposedly, the family already had two main daughters. C.P. Pu was the young Frenchman's boredom and discontent to manipulate him, inventing a story of the deception he had to go through. He slowly drew Beresford into an affair that would last many years. Beresford had previously homosexual encounters, but considered himself heterosexual. Eventually, the diplomat was led into spying for the Chinese, all the while he believed C.P. Pu was a woman. His yearning for adventure had made him that vulnerable. Repressed types are perfect victims for a deep seduction. People who repress the appetite for pleasure make ripe victims. Particularly later in their lives, the 18th century Chinese Emperor Ming Huang spent much of his reign trying to rid his court of its costly addiction to luxuries, and was himself a model of austerity and virtue. But the moment he saw the concubine Yang Qingxi bathing in a placed lake, everything changed. The most charming woman in the realm, she was the mistress of his son. Exciting. Exerting his power, the emperor won her away, only to become her abject slave. The choice of the right victim is equally important in politics. Mass seducers such as Napoleon or John F. Kennedy offers their public just what it lacks. When Napoleon came to power, the French people's sense of pride was beaten down by the bloody aftermath of the French Revolution. He offered them glory and conquest. Kennedy recognized that Americans were bored with the stultifying comfort of the Eisenhower years. He gave them adventure and risk. More important, he tailored his appeal to the group most vulnerable to him, the younger generation. Respectable politicians Successful politicians know that not everyone will be susceptible to their charm, but if they can find a group of believers with a need to be filled, they have supporters who will stand by them no matter what. Symbol: big game. Lions are dangerous. To hunt them is to know the thrill of risk. Leopards are clever and swift, offering the excitement of a difficult chase. Never rush into the hunt. Know your prey and choose it carefully. Do not waste time with small game. The rabbits, the rabbits that back into snares, the mink that walk into a scented trap. Challenge is pleasure. Reversal. There is no possible reversal. There is nothing to be gained from trying to seduce the person who is close to you or who cannot provide the pleasure and chase that you need. Tomorrow, create a false sense of security. I'm loving this book, man. Why? Okay, see you tomorrow.